This is the Tree of Life, Season 22, Chapter 3. In this episode, we will be talking about measurement reversal as a manifestation of two distinct forms of interaction. To start off, under tautological natural law, during reverse substitution, the incoming consciousness acts out the acquiescence of the outgoing consciousness, which so long as there is no negation, becomes integrated into the self-representation of the outgoing consciousness. It becomes integrated by way of emotional coupling, that is the phase linking of affirmation of one impulse in parallel within a digital structure. Thus, in the absence of negation at the conclusion of the reverse substitution event, decoherence never occurs. Now, if there is negation at the conclusion of the reverse substitution event, then there is decoherence, the negation representing a partial measurement, the result being that the incoming consciousness migrates, becoming an object referential to that self-representation. At this point, a sequential substitution event follows, and the incoming consciousness compels compliance with acquiescence by force. This represents a measurement reversal, destroying the partial measurement. Since it occurs within a substitution event sequential to a reverse substitution event, the path of decoherence is erased both prospectively and retrospectively by the measurement reversal. Thus there are two forms of interaction between the outgoing consciousness and the incoming consciousness. The first is described by the coupling-producing integration of the impulse, described by a phase linking of affirmation of a particular impulse. The second is described by a looser form of referential association, producing acquiescence by force, but non-integration. In this episode, I would like to return to the concept of affirmational and negational rhythms. Last season, we described how affirmational rhythms are those which generate recurrence of impulses through integration by reverse substitution. Negational rhythms are those which become regular, that is, occur less frequently, by expression during substitution events, because there is no integration. But any rhythm can occur in either a substitution event or a reverse substitution event. Ultimately, the effect of the substitution event is non-integration, and the effect of reverse substitution is recurrence. If we imagine that some of the rhythms, both affirmational and negational, represent greater phase linking than others, then we can see that distinct rhythms correspond to distinct levels of interaction between the incoming and outgoing consciousness. Thus, in the migration of the incoming consciousness becoming referential to the self-representation, this transition may represent a distinct level of interaction between the incoming and outgoing consciousness. So, for example, initially, the incoming consciousness may be acting out acquiescence, which falls under the sexual cycle. But in non-integration, that is negation, the substitution event falls into the interaction of the sleep cycle awareness. That being said, the compelling of acquiescence at the conclusion of that event, the measurement reversal must eliminate the partial measurement, the negation which originated the substitution event in the first place. Thus, what we are really seeing is a migration of the incoming consciousness through the sexual cycle, to the sleep cycle, and back again, whilst in a timeline that is erased by the measurement reversal. Now, it is also important to note that rhythms like the natural law establishing priority can be hierarchical or tautological. They are hierarchical when their objects are determined by preferential expectation matching, establishing hierarchical priority. They are tautological when their objects are determined by emotional coupling, establishing tautological priority. This makes sense since hierarchical natural law is linked to common objects. In priority, we see common objects between the incoming and outgoing consciousness. Only possession belongs to the outgoing consciousness. That is, a common orientation is recalled by both consciousness to the same objects. This common orientation both reflects and recapitulates the hierarchy. Thus, it is possible to see that the sleep cycle, centering around the movement of celestial objects, and a common orientation to those objects, could be a hierarchical rhythm. Likewise, the sexual cycle can be restricted by preferential expectation matching. When two suitors are seeking the same object of affection, and one achieves their affection, but the other does not. All of this tells us something interesting, as well about proprietary experience channels. We saw that proprietary experience channels are created by the hierarchical priority of a reverse substitution event producing non-integration, resulting in force applied to the subject by the incoming consciousness. This re-establishes the rigidity of role assignments pursuant to preferential expectation matching, which in the context of a string produces segmentation. Thus, experience channels created by segmentation permit the tautological flow of consciousness from vessel to vessel, directing it so to speak through a particular vessel. By repetitious segmentation, we see the creation of a pathway through which the tautological flow can travel. But the key lesson that can be learned from all of this is that the interactions between the incoming and outgoing consciousness that permit reverse substitution and substitution events rely upon distinct levels of phase alignment. Since we saw from the last episode that the incoming and outgoing consciousness analogously represent the same waveform, it may be that these distinct forms of interaction entail a particular form of wave exhibiting self-interactions. That's the end of the podcast for today.